How did this drive you into to radical KM?
Oh, yeah. Again, where to start with that story? So I have this undergrad in accounting, this MBA in IT, and I was very much about the process and the analytical, and a few years after I'd been out on my own, I was at a leadership workshop as a participant, and we painted, and I hadn't painted since I was a kid, and I was like, oh, this is fun. This is way more fun than spreadsheets. you know, and how do I bring this into my knowledge management consulting? And I'm like, there's something here. There's a connection here with knowledge management and knowledge culture and sharing and creativity and innovation and coming up with new ideas and things. And so I just kept pulling at that string. And it's really hard when you're self-employed to try and shift what you're doing and how you're talking about things, because people know you for one thing. So it's been a slow evolution. Well, up until the pandemic, it was a slow evolution, I will say, of me just trial and erroring, what happened, what worked, what didn't work. I brought little creative icebreaker, I didn't call them that at the time, I just were creative little interventions into my workshops and my strategy workshops and my requirements analysis workshops, and the engagement changed so much. The energy in the room changed. I got better answers to the questions. They were the same questions I'd always asked. I still use, the same questions, honestly, that I started asking 20 years ago. They're still largely the same questions. But when I started these interventions, the engagement from the participants just changed, and the responses I was getting changed, and for the better, and so that really inspired me to keep going, and keep exploring. And then I moved to Berlin in 2015. I moved to Berlin and got connected to more people here working in the space of business and the arts. And that's when things really started to open up, because I found out about arts-based interventions and all of that stuff. And so, and then the pandemic hit, and it's like, okay, we need something to engage people in this virtual setting that we're all in, and build relationships. And so this is the little icebreakers and stuff that I do. I do bigger interventions too. We paint, when I have some of my workshops and classes, we paint virtually. So, and people say to me, well, why can't we use some kind of app to paint? And because that's not painting, for one thing. But there's an undo button, when you're using an app. I have some of those apps on my iPad. It's not the same. There's a lesson to be learned by not being able to undo, resilience and that curiosity of, oops, I got brown in my yellow. What am I going to do now? I wanted to go in a particular direction. And so it helps us reactivate, our inner artists and our creativity that's all been educated out of us, because we've been brought up in this production line mentality of our education system, and this inability to measure creativity, analytically. And yet creativity has this huge impact, but it's kind of nebulous and not well defined. And you can't just go 1 + 1 = 2. So like you can with accounting. And yet creativity, when I started adding it in my workshops and my activities, it wasn't 1 + 1 = 2. It was 1 + 1 = 100, because of the multiplication and the exponential nature of getting people out of their comfort zones and thinking about things differently. So that's really exploded since the start of the pandemic, because people finally are recognizing that we need to do things differently, that we are knowledge workers. And so this has been really encouraging and really exciting to see, that evolution. So.
That's really interesting. I was asked to come to the Henley Forum many, many years ago, long before I was teaching KM, when I was teaching mostly library and information science. And my colleague at University of South Carolina, Karen Gavigan, and I had written a graphic novel, or edited, I should say, with some young men that were in the juvenile justice system for crime.
Right.
And we asked them to write a story, or to tell us a story, to make up a story collectively that would help people their age, young people, to know enough about HIV to prevent the likelihood of getting it. And
Right.
so we worked with them over a summer, and they came up with a story of football mayhem, American football mayhem, and jealousy and rivalry and beautiful girls, and of all shapes and sizes. And these young men were predominantly African American. And the reason we did this, because South Carolina has one of the highest rates of HIV in the young African American population, and we wanted to give them a tool that would be written in their own vernacular,
Yeah.
and written by them to tell their story.
Yeah.
Was an amazing process. And what ultimately happened with that was that we tested it and compared it against, CDC materials for teens, and this sort of stuff. And our knowledge gains, we did a before and after they read the novel, measurement of what do you know about HIV, and then read the novel, and then afterwards tell us what you know. And there were pretty tremendous knowledge gains. And we were very happy that it turned out so well. And we got a lot of press for it. We did an interview on New York Times and all that stuff.
Wow.
Anyway, we got to the Henley Forum because they wanted me to do a workshop on how do you write a graphic novel, basically. And
Uh,
so they set up the workshop room. I was just delighted when I walked in, because they had easels set up, and
uh,
they worked in teams, and they drew their story. They did a storyboard of their story that they were trying to tell, that would solve a KM problem. And it
nice.
was a very interesting approach. And this was Jane's idea. And so it was just wonderful. I've got her book right here. Anyway, I can't find my book right now, but anyway, I think that in a sense, this is another version of radical KM, is to try something different, to solve problems and work together. And it does so many good things. It takes people out of their comfort zone. They don't know what to do. It's like you said, getting a little yellow in the brown. I'm like, that's brilliant, because it's a problem they have to solve.
Yeah.
And you can ask somebody else, how do you solve that problem? So I love this idea, and I think that we need more of this. I was at a different conference another time where they started their presentation. It was a panel that were all talking about the same project, and they started with a meditation. They made everybody meditate before they
Nice.
started.
I
And
do that in my sessions.
it's a great idea. It's
It
really,
is.
Go
It
ahead.
is, and it makes such a difference, especially now that we're in virtual meetings all the time and we're jumping from one to the other to the next, and it's like, hold on, what's this meeting about? So yeah, I start off, I won't say all of my sessions, but a lot of my workshops and my webinars and classes and whatever with a meditation, just to help us catch our breath, and get ready to focus on whatever we're going to talk about. And I have people, right in the chat window of the meetings, and things go, oh, that was so nice, to catch my breath and to just have a minute to collect myself,
Right.
So yeah, it has this big impact. I had one woman in a session a few years ago, just at the start of the pandemic. She'd lost her mom to COVID,
Mm.
and so 3 or 4 months earlier, and just hadn't, understandably, been able to sort of not be thinking about that.
Right.
And so we did this. I didn't know any of this. I just led the session the same way as I led the session. And then she shared this afterwards. I'm like, she said that the meditation was the first time that she'd been able to really take a breath and not be sort of compulsively thinking about that her mom had died
Right.
um, for 2 or 3 minutes. And that really touched me, and said, you see these comments on social media about, you don't know what other people are going through. You don't. And you don't know what taking 3 minutes to do a little guided visualization is going to do for somebody. Just to collect your thoughts and go, okay, it's not as bad as I think it is, or it's everything's going to be okay. I don't have to have the answer right this moment. I don't have to know how to get the brown out of the yellow. It's
Yeah.
okay. I can sit there and let it dry and figure it out tomorrow, which is often the answer to a lot of things. Don't know. I'm going to sleep on it and see how I feel about it tomorrow. And maybe, my brain will work while I'm sleeping and come up with an answer for me in the morning. And so often it does, or 2 or 3 weeks later, sometime later, we come up with a solution, or somebody comes to us, sends us an email and says, oh, I thought of you when, with this problem, and I thought you might be able to answer. And somehow that's an answer to, something else that we have thought about, those kinds of serendipitous,
Exactly.
things. There's more meaning in the stuff than I think we really understand. So
I agree. I think we're just starting to sort of pull some things together. The notion of wellness that has come up more during COVID, I think, because we've become aware of how damaging it's been to us, and also to have the space to respect each other's space and time, and to take things a little bit slower so it sinks in a little bit more, putting space between meetings, for example. And there's
yeah,
discussion a lot about reducing the work week, because there's no reason not to. The productivity doesn't seem to fall.
no,
So yeah. So, oh,
yeah,
this is really intriguing. And I think that the emotional space that we ignore, especially in American culture. I don't know if that's worldwide. My experience is different in the places that I've been, but I think we don't always allow each other to have that emotional space that we might need, because we get frustrated or we're upset about something else in our own personal lives. And
yeah,
just having that space to acknowledge that we each have our own lives, and we don't have to share it. That's not the point. It's just giving you the space you need. Is such
yeah.
a great idea. And to blend that in to KM is the perfect place for it. I really
It
agree.
is. This is what knowledge workers need. This is, knowledge management is about humans, about, yeah, not about computers and technology. And the creativity stuff and the painting stuff. I was talked about the pandemic and how things really opened up after that. And that was true for me too. I was used to working remotely. I worked remotely the last few years that I was at HP. I went into the office every day, but I didn't work with anybody in that office. I just went into the office because I didn't like working at home by myself. So I at least knew people, in the Toronto office, so I could go for coffee or go for lunch and things. But my program team was in Atlanta, it was in California, it was in Australia, it was in Europe. So yeah, so I worked remotely then, and then I've been self-employed, and like I say, a lot of that has been, I would go in sometimes for meetings, certainly, but a lot of the work was done at home in my home office. So, but so the pandemic started, and I was like, well, what's everybody freaking out about? Because I'm used to working remotely, and this is not a big deal, and things just got turned upside down, and I wasn't sure, how to handle that with my consulting practice. So I painted it. A friend of mine said to me, "Well, you paint it. You make everybody else paint." And I said, "Oh yeah, you're right. I guess I should take some of my own medicine." But the insights, that's where when I started calling it radical KM instead of creative KM, and people reacted a lot better, a
Yeah.
lot more curious, a lot more engaged with the idea of radical KM and
Yeah.
what's that, rather than I think with creative KM, they thought they knew what that was, and it didn't sound like anything that they wanted to make time for. And so radical KM, which is about going back to the roots, about how we learn, because knowledge management is about learning,
Mhm.
and we need to continuously learn now. And so this is about, radical KM is about going back to the roots of being playful, about reactivating our curiosity and our creativity and our wonderment about, well, what happens when I do this? And so this came out of me painting my consulting practice. And that really opened up the box for me and said, oh, you need to call it something else. And here, my brain supplied the word, about three weeks into the process. What I thought was going to be a month-long process of painting my consulting practice turned into 3.5 months. Went from the 1st of September to just before Christmas, and turned out to be 5 paintings. So yeah, I have a video on YouTube. Maybe I'll try and remember to send it to you afterwards. You can
Yeah,
put it.
I would love the students to see it. Yeah, that would be
So
great.
yeah, and I talk about, the insights, the blocks that I came up with that were things that were stopping me from seeing. So I painted them because the painting is about tapping into, well, what color is that? I'm frustrated with something. What color is that? What tool should I use to express that? What should I do? One of the canvases, I cut the canvas in the spiral, and then I had to sew it back together. Um, and I had a great time. I show my friend that had suggested this, and he's like, "You make people nervous when you do that." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it's so much fun, because I do take stuff together and I put it back together, and honestly, it's more beautiful when I put it back together. And absolutely, it's scary getting there. I get that, but trust me, I've been doing this for 20 years, 25 years. Let me take it apart together, and we'll figure out a really beautiful way to put it back together and make it even more, more meaningful and more successful. We don't have to fit it all in the box.
That's
So
really interesting. I wonder if you had a team and you asked them to paint their own their approach to the same problem, a common problem, is have them each paint it, and then have them describe what their painting is saying. Have you done that?
I haven't done that. That's an interesting idea. I would be curious to see what happened, because I would expect different results, because everybody's got their own perspective on it.
It's like you
So
said,
yeah,
why those colors? You're the one
yeah,
who made me think of it. You going, why those colors? What does that
yeah,
represent to you? Because, most of us are not really consciously aware of what we paint. We're just doing. There's something that goes unfiltered in the brain, I think, and it just comes out in the artwork. And then when you ask people to describe it, they sometimes are surprised. I think I've done this with storytelling, have somebody tell me a favorite fairy tale, right?
right.
And I'll say, well, why that character and what did they do then, And, I think it's the same thing with art. There's a possibility there that they could realize something about themselves. So anyway, we'll do that project together. That would be fun. That
Excellent.
would be
That
fun.
would be fun.
I'm going to go get paints. I'm all excited about this. This is really great stuff. Oh, Stephanie, you're going to have to come back and talk more. This is great. Well, I'm going to take a little minute here just to kind of shift our focus, just because we have to have an end to it, and I don't want to, but
Okay.
I know we talked about this before we started the recording a little bit about what is KM about, and we did talk about that a little bit at the beginning, but I think it's really important to revisit that. And what I thought I would do is ask you to just sort of summarize 2 points. One is, what do you think is important about KM that the students would be able to identify with? So 2 things. One is, what is KM really about in your opinion? And then what advice might you give students about that in your experience?
Okay. You might have to remind me of the second
Okay,
question.
sure. I
But
got it.
the what is KM really about? And I don't know if I would have said this 24 years ago when I started at HP, but I would definitely say this now. And it's about humans, it's about people, it's about continuous learning and being curious, and asking the questions. And the questions are more important than the answers, honestly. um, we get so tied up in the answers and capturing everything and putting it in the technology. And the technology is important. I'm not gonna say that it's not. I spend a lot of time helping organizations pick the right technology or utilize the technology that they've picked and have poorly implemented because they've not talked to the users. But ultimately, knowledge management is about learning and about, yeah, helping the humans, helping us be more curious. And the way the world is changing, has changed, is changing, will continue to change. We need to help the humans out because we've been sold this idea that emotions aren't important, curiosity isn't important, that there's one right answer for things. There isn't. There's a million right answers. There's many right answers as there are questions, and more than that, honestly. Sometimes I get asked about my definition for KM, and I always say there's as many definitions of KM as there are people doing it.
Right.
And actually I would say there's actually probably N+1, right? So, or N+2, because certainly I have 2 or 3 definitions depending on the situation, but that's, yeah, KM is ultimately about the humans and the and people, and helping knowledge workers have the knowledge and the skills that they need to do their jobs. So this is, in this day and age, it's much more about curiosity and creativity and being curious, having resilience, being okay to sit and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I don't have the answer right now. Let me get back to you on that. There's so many people that are afraid to say, I don't have the answer. People with multiple degrees, years and years of schooling, that, they want to have the right answer. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there isn't a right answer, at least not an obvious one. And so this is why the creativity stuff and the arts-based intervention stuff that I do is important, because it helps surface that stuff that you don't necessarily think of, or that's a connection that's not a direct, it's not an accounting problem. It's, it's somehow something else, and you need that to bubble to the surface. And so the creativities, those activities help surface that, get you out of that mindset that it's got to be, the answer has to be an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
Maybe there's no answer. So yeah, so this is knowledge management for me, is about helping people do that. And we are in a knowledge economy, and have been for a long time, and we would be well placed to do better job of acknowledging that and helping the humans. So
I think you need t-shirts made up that say Radical KM, helping the humans. That's your tagline.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's great. Yeah. Well, the only other thing then I would ask is just, in your brilliance of your discovery here that you're sharing with our students today, what might you offer them as some advice to think about as they go forward in their KM careers?
The technology is important. The AI is important, but it's not the only thing. It's certainly not everything. It's about our humanity. I know it's about our humanness, and it's about using the tools as a tool, not the end point. Yeah, I don't know. Does that sound like inspirational?
Yeah, it does. And I liked the thing you said earlier about holding your hand open.
Yeah.
It's really important to be able to work together and to have that open flexibility that you've talked about, so that you can allow room for that creativity and potential, we would say maybe innovation, but it's also just the mind space that leads to that we don't always talk about.
Yeah.
And that's what I see happening here, is there are many ways to get that mind space: painting, stories, meditation, just being able to be human together is
Yeah.
what makes it really work. And I'm really excited about the work that you're doing, and we'll have to follow up on that project idea. So,
Excellent.
well, I thank you so, so much. This has been a lovely conversation, and I've learned a lot from you. And I know that our students will be very interested in your video too. And if students have questions for you, I'll just send them to you, and you can
Oh, sure.
answer them. And I so appreciate your time today, Stephanie. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Yes, I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Sure.